Hello and welcome to this latest event from the CIPR Sports Network, the next in our series of conversations for comms professionals of all backgrounds, members and prospective members, those working with sport, within sport, or with an interest in what can be learned from sport. I'm Scott Dougal. Joining me is Chris Haynes, a fellow Vice Chair of the CIPR Sports Network. Today we're speaking to Craig Spence, Chief Brand and Communications Officer for the International Paralympic Committee, the IPC. Craig has been with the IPC for 15 years now and has just about seen it all in a period covering 7 Paralympic Games. I think seven's correct. Winter and summer. Before that, he was head of communications to the Rugby Football League, and before that, he worked agency side, so we know he can graft too. Like me, he is an alumni of the University of Central Lancashire. Go UCLan. Welcome, Craig.
Hi Scott, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. So yes, like I say, you have been with the IPC now for around 15 years, which means you started just before London 2012. And I think certainly for people in the UK, London 2012 was regarded as a breakthrough moment for Paralympic sport. But can you describe what you arrived at when you walked to your desk in 2010, Bonn, and what that 2 year period was like building up to the games?
Yeah, I actually left the UK on the 2-year anniversary, 2-year mark to go towards the London 2012 Paralympic Games. When I joined the IPC, I knew very little about them, apart from what I'd researched for my interview. So the IPC was a very small organization at the time. There was just 30 employees, and the communications team was me, one other person, and an intern. So a really tiny team, and there was no real plan. And we just got some research back from the organizing committees that said very few people in the UK could name a Paralympian. And that was always going to be a challenge because many people engage into sport through athletes. So if people don't know who the athletes are, how on earth are we going to sell over 2 million tickets?
Yeah.
So we quickly formulated a strategy to really raise the profile of the leading Paralympians and to educate people about the sports. And one of the first pieces of work we did within 3 months was we worked together with London 2012. We worked together with Channel 4, and we brought all the commercial partners back together and said, look, let's use the Paralympic Games in London as an opportunity to completely reposition Paralympic sport. Because many people at the time perceived Paralympic sport to be just persons with disabilities taking part in sport for fun, recreationally. And in my research for the role, I quickly discovered just how high performance Paralympic sport was. You had athletes with below knee leg amputees running 100 meters in less than 11 seconds. Now, not many people on the planet can run that even with 2 legs. So getting everyone to sign up to that vision of repositioning Paralympic sport was a crucial moment. And from there, everyone got behind the direction we wanted to head. Let's focus on the same athletes across communications, marketing campaigns, TV promotional campaigns. Let's make these athletes look high performance. And that was quite easy because they were high performance. And then we worked our backsides off. And with London, we delivered what were benchmark Paralympic Games in terms of everything moved forward. And the organising committee did a tremendous job, as did obviously Channel 4 and all the commercial partners who got involved. So it was a real team effort to deliver such spectacular games, and we ended up with full stadia and record global TV audiences. So all in all, it was a big success, but that was done with 2.5 people effectively at the IPC.
That repositioning was brilliant. And I'm wondering if it had an effect on the way that the Olympics and the Olympic athletes were subsequently presented. It felt that after 2012, it was much more on the backstory and the personality rather than the high performance of Olympians.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd noticed, I mean, I'll be honest with you, before I joined the IPC, I knew absolutely nothing about the Paralympic Games. I didn't even know the IPC existed. And when I did loads of research during the summer building up to the interviews, I was looking at the training programs of the athletes, and I'm like, they're training just as hard as Olympians here. And previously, a lot of the media's coverage on the Paralympians was telling the backstory of the athlete and the sob story that comes often with, and the sympathy vote that comes with being a Paralympian. Now, you're not going to buy and you're not going to sell 2.5 million tickets or generate global audiences just because you know the backstory of an athlete. And for me, it was really important that the positioning was all about sport. Let people understand just how good these athletes are. And then we can also tell the story of maybe how they lost their leg or whether they were born with a disability or acquired their disability. And that switch around was really important. And you could see the athletes grow with it because they were pretty much bored of telling their story about this is how I acquired my disability or this is how I was born. And the athletes were so proud to be able to talk about just how hard they trained. And then the Olympians were willing to talk about the Paralympians. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of the countries who were coming to the games had brought their training programs together and therefore were training together. And they were seeing the Paralympians training just as hard as they were preparing for the Olympics. And it's just run of the mill across the Paralympic movement. That's how we promote Paralympic sport. But 15 years ago, that was a groundbreaking move to completely change the way we did communications. And what was so good was everyone bought into the vision. And that was step one for me, was articulating why this needed to happen and getting everyone to join us on the journey and saying, look, if we all get behind this, we think we can deliver spectacular Paralympic Games. And that's what we got in London. They were absolutely phenomenal and had such a great legacy and impact on the UK. And that's, I suppose, the other part of the Paralympic Games is, yes, it's one of the world's greatest sporting events, but the impact and the change, the transformational change it leads in the host city and the host country is like no other sporting event on this planet. And it was important that we got those messages out, and Channel 4 helped us with that. I mean, by recruiting presenters with disabilities for the first time. Sounds crazy. It's the norm today, but back in 2012 it was groundbreaking, and there was a whole host of talent that never existed, and Channel 4 invested into bringing that talent through. And the likes of Scott's old colleague Alex Brooker now is a household name, and people don't realise today that he came through that training program for London 2012 with Channel 4, which is a tremendous legacy.
It was, yeah. It was. I mean, it was a real moonshot. I mean, Alex, I get a real kick every time I see him on TV because he's still, as you say, on TV now. But it was a bit of a moonshot for him at the time. He just gave it a go and uncovered this amazing talent. And I think, I think that what you've spoken about there, that having the value of a great broadcast partner in Channel 4, and I suppose your role, Craig, in being the comms which connects the federation to the broadcaster, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing for London was bringing all the stakeholders together regularly,
Yeah.
to get everyone behind the vision, and then everyone implementing it and checking where we were and what was working and what wasn't. So, for example, in the build-up to every Paralympic Games, all the commercial partners come to the IPC going, okay, we're going to do a campaign on the Paralympics, but who should the athletes be in our campaigns? So what we did is we had a list of athletes which we called our ones to watch, which is what we're still doing today because it works so well. And that list of ones to watch athletes, those were the people that we recommended to our marketing partners as featuring as the faces of their campaigns. Those are the athletes who featured in the Channel 4 advert. And those were the athletes that we threw loads of comm support behind on traditional media to build their awareness. And I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to promote all 4,400 athletes who go to a Paralympic Games, but with 2.5 people, that's not easy. So we really focused on raising the profile of a small group of athletes and doing it really well, and everyone joining forces on that. And that was really important. And when we got to the games, ticket sales were phenomenal. I mean, and Channel 4 did such a great job with the repositioning of Paralympic sport. I mean, not only did they do a groundbreaking TV commercial that really did just open the eyes of the entire British public, but they also did it with humour. I mean, I always remember the closing ceremony of the London 2012 Olympic Games, and these billboards appeared across the whole of the UK saying, thanks for the warm-up. Very tongue-in-cheek, But that's how we jokingly reference the Olympic Games. It's our test event. And it was a warm-up for us, and we were ready for the big event, and the big event delivered.
Craig, can I ask, you present there a brilliant, I suppose, unifying idea, but a transformation in the way that it was done. As the person looking after comms, how did you persuade people internally to take that step, which in retrospect was so powerful?
Internally, it was quite easy because that's what basically I think got me the job.
Yeah.
So when I did my interviews with the president and the chief executive, I said, look, I know nothing about Paralympic sport, but I know that we need to really build the profile of the athletes, and if you give me the freedom to do this, I'll deliver. And they backed me, which was really important. And when you have an organization, I mean, at the IPC in 2010, we were still a very young organization. We were almost like a startup. So because we had so much going on, I mean, you imagine running an entire sporting movement internationally with just 30 people. That enabled the bosses to give me the freedom. You're the person we trust to deliver on comms. Go away and do it. And that was fantastic for me. I love working almost with autonomy, and the fact that my bosses trusted in the vision that I'd sold to them in the interview and then gave me the freedom then to implement once I came into position, I think really, really helped. And then being able to go to our partners and our broadcasters and we're a membership-based organization. So the IPC's our members are international federations of sport, national Paralympic committees. Going to them and selling that vision was really easy because they'd never had a vision really from the IPC to buy into previously. So by being able to go, this is the direction we're going to head, everyone. And don't get me wrong, some people were unhappy with it. We had some pushback from national Paralympic committees saying, you're promoting athletes before they've secured their spot for the games. And that puts some unwanted pressure onto them. And I'm like, but they're going to make it unless they get injured. Do you know what I mean? They're a world-class athlete. Unless they get injured, and we can easily explain a late injury, they're going to be at the games and they're going to be a star of the games. So selling that vision was a key piece of stakeholder work. I think when people think of comms, traditionally it's how do you get the media coverage? The stakeholder part was the most difficult part, because if we didn't get the stakeholders on board, we were never going to be able to deliver this global vision. And so that the legwork was the first few months of getting the stakeholders on board.
Yeah, I mean, I think the three of us have been in comms for quite some. I think we'd all agree that it's just all, if you get the stakeholder bit right, everything else gets so much easier. And that's in the good times, and I guess in the bad times as well. And you had that um, pinnacle moment, I guess, in London 2012. Although I know you will say that the Paralympic movement has gone on from strength to strength since then. But coming out of that, you then had Paralympic sport's biggest name charged with murder with Oscar Pistorius. And how can you describe how you? I mean, obviously there was real tragedy at the heart of that. How did you manage that from the point of view of the IPC?
That will go down as one of the most difficult days of work I think I'll ever do, and something when you join a sports organization, you never expect to be involved in such a high profile case. At the time I was in Canada, we were working on the Toronto 2015 Pan American Games, and I probably had 2 hours in bed when I got a phone call, and the phone rang, and I realized that my phone was just full of messages of people trying to get hold of me. And the first person to speak to me was Dan Roan from the BBC. And he was like, Craig, Oscar Pistorius has mistook his girlfriend for an intruder in his house and he's shot her dead. What's the IPC's view on that? And I'm like, Dan, I'm in bed. And I think I swore, and I was like, leave it with me, and I'll get back to you. And it was really tricky because still at the IPC, I think our comms team at the time was 4 people. So suddenly we've got the biggest story in the world, and you've got 4 people. And at the time, we had people all over the world doing various other site visits for other events. The first thing was it was a real mental issue for me because I knew Oscar really well. I'd known him for 3 years. He'd been a real good asset for the Paralympic movement, a great athlete, a great ambassador for what we'd done. And it was someone I could count as a friend. I used to exchange messages with him regularly. So coming to terms with knowing that someone you knew really well and you'd built a relationship with for 3 years had killed someone was a real shock to the system. And I remember thinking, I've got to quickly park that emotional side of what I'm feeling and look at what we've got here. And the first thing that the first thing I did was I phoned our president, who was based in Crewe. Again, 6 o'clock in the morning. I rang him and he was like, no one rings with good news at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I informed him. Our chief executive was with me in Toronto, so I rang him 3 o'clock in the morning, told him, and told them, look, you're going to get called on this. Please just direct everything through to me, and we'll see where we can get to. And then I started trying to draft the statement of what was the initial response to this. And that's really difficult to do, drafting the statement when your phone doesn't stop ringing. Like literally, I remember looking at my phone, 30 missed calls, 60 missed calls, and I think it stopped counting missed calls after 100. But getting that statement right was vitally important. And it was like, look, they're still going to want a statement from us, even if I don't give it to them now. They can wait 20 minutes. I need to get this statement done. And on the statement, I was really clear of, look, everyone was giving, at the time, the initial reaction was giving sympathy to Oscar because the story at the initial outbreak was that he'd mistaken this as a burglary and that fact that it was a tragic accident. And I was always very clear when chatting with our president and chief executive was, if it's not an accident and we go out with a massive vote of sympathy here, we will get absolutely hammered later. So in our first statement, we didn't really mention Oscar Pistorius. We just said, look, this is a tragic incident. Our thoughts are very much with the family of the deceased, Riva Steenkamp. And this is a police investigation. And we were very clear on, very brief, and sometimes less is more in these situations. So we were very clear on our thoughts were with the family, and we never really mentioned Oscar. And crazily, on that day in Toronto, we'd set up a media day to promote the Pan American Games. We'd lined up 25 interviews with Canadian media to promote the event that was happening in 2 years' time. And I remember the Director of Communications of Toronto 2015 ringing me going, you'll want to cancel all the interviews then? And I went, no, we'll do them. And he went, what? And I went, yeah, absolutely. Because I said, we want to grow the Paralympic movement and we can't pick and choose when we speak to the media. And we've got to front up here. And we did. And between our chief executive and myself that day, I think we did something like 60, 70 interviews each. Unbelievable. Whilst trying to control your emotions about someone being involved in a murder case. That was, I think we got day one out of the way, and I was then flying back to Germany. The flight was the most amazing flight of my life because I could turn my phone off. But I also remember hallucinating on the flight from lack of sleep. It was really tricky. Then when I got back to Bonn, I slept for 12 hours. And then I quickly realized and formulated that we needed a strategy to get out of this because these stories run and run. And a lot of the media was saying, where does the Paralympic movement go from here when its biggest star has been involved in a murder case? So we quickly formulated a plan that was, look, the Paralympic movement has and always will be bigger than one individual. And London 2012 showed that. We had all these other athletes like Johnny Peacock, Hannah Cockcroft, David Weir, just to name the British athletes who came to the forefront. And let's not forget that at London 2012, Oscar Pistorius only won one gold medal. He was beaten in the 100 meters and he was beaten in the 200 meters famously by the Brazilian Alan Oliveira. And we then proactively set up the following Monday. We were by then in Spain for our skiing world championships. We set up 50 one-on-one interviews with our president, with international media titles, the agencies and the big broadcasters, basically trying to fill the void of, is this the end of the Paralympic movement, with our messaging that this isn't the end of the Paralympic movement because we have and will always be bigger than one person. And that was really important for us to do. And then obviously the touch points for us were on the times of when he was in court. But yeah, it was something you never expect to be involved in. I mean, it was the biggest news story in the world, and you were at the center of it, working for a sports organization, but you're involved in the case. Do you know what I mean? It was a complete paradox of what you just didn't expect when you signed up for the IPC.
Absolutely.
Craig, something, look, each of us has worked in global sports and traveled whilst managing big issues. What really brilliant example there is that time zone difference. And in this instance, and actually the resource that you have and how you apply it. Can you tell me, being in a different country, and I suppose it's a global story, so it's coming around the clock.
Yeah.
Or were there areas where there were more calls and the time zones in a way helped you get ebb and flow in the way you're working?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, when I took the first call from Dan, it was almost breakfast time in the UK, and the UK is traditionally where we have our biggest Paralympic audience, and therefore that's where, probably after South Africa, the story was biggest. And then so we managed to get through Europe, and then yeah, the story ran and ran. And I always remember when I was flying back from Toronto, I'd had this moment with our chief executive where before we went to the airport, we just took a moment, and both of us cried. Look, we were so mentally exhausted at the day we'd just been put through. And we were like, look, most of the interviews are done now. He was flying to Brazil. I was flying back to Germany. We're done. Let's take a moment. Let's go to the airport. Let's have a beer. No one will, and then we can calm down. And I remember being in the lounge at the airport, and it was 10 o'clock news came on, and in the lounge was like 20 screens. And obviously, the not top story was Oscar Pistorius. And I'm not kidding. At one point, on the 20 screens was either my face or our chief executives. And everyone in the lounge just turned around and obviously wanted to ask us a million questions on the case. And we were just like, look, can you just leave us? But getting everyone, again, going back to the stakeholder management, we needed to not just control the media on that day, it was our staff. How do we brief all our staff not to give statements on this issue? We had media turning up outside IPC headquarters, so it was instantly briefing all the staff. This is our holding position. Please be quiet on social media. Let the comms team just get through what's going to be a really difficult 36 hours for us. Everyone was on message. We briefed our sponsors because obviously they were all asking, where does the movement go from here? We've just invested in you after London 2012. Same with our broadcasters. So this one was, yes, it was a media issue where we needed to firefight for a while, but then it was the bigger piece which was coming for us was the stakeholders. Where does the Paralympic movement go from here? You've just had the most successful Paralympic Games in history, but your number one athlete has done this and it's going to impact you for a while. Now, the method in the madness was going back to the London 2012 piece about promoting athletes, we strategically decided in the build-up to London 2012 not to focus on Oscar Pistorius. Because I always said Oscar will build his profile enough because of what he's trying to do with the Olympic movement. And if Oscar was to fall under a bus one day and we've just put everything on Oscar, we're doomed. And here we were less than 12 months after the games, and actually there was method in the madness, not expecting this, obviously, but that seemed to work for us.
One of the things, I mean, there's a ton of good sense in there, Craig, but I think one of the things you said quite early on was how important it was to give yourself space to think through that, so you don't say something in the moment which gets you through the first 12 hours, but which causes you problems further down the line. You don't do the expedient thing in the moment. You think beyond the first hour, before the first 12 hours. And I know you've not been sure of issues to manage, but I guess a similarly trying moment was when for Rio 2016, when the IPC, I think I'm right in saying, took the lead in banning Russia for the doping at Sochi 2014. Can you just talk us through how you managed that?
Well, Rio 2016 is a book within itself, Scott, because we had two crisis management exercises running parallel to each other. So in terms of the games themselves, the organizing committee was running out of money. and there was a real chance that the Paralympic Games may not happen in Rio. We'd had the most successful Paralympic Games in London, and then the organising committee was struggling so financially, and they were like, we can't organise the Paralympics, there's no budget left. And I remember our chief executive ringing me saying, you need to plan the PR strategy for the cancellation of the Paralympics. So that was crisis one we were dealing with. At the same time, Professor McLaren was publishing his report into the doping practices of the Russians during Sochi 2014. And so, yeah, managing those two ones were difficult. And then obviously the IPC took the decision just before the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games to suspend the National Paralympic Committee of Russia. So again, one of the world's biggest stories. And this was a real tricky one to do because, again, in terms of stakeholder management, usually when you make this announcement, you do it on, we were going to do it in Germany where we're based, but our president at the time was in Brazil for the Olympics. And we knew all the sports media were in Rio for the games. So we flew, I did a day trip to Rio, which was the craziest thing I think I'll ever do. I flew at 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening, arrived in Rio at 5 in the morning, did the press conference at 10 and was back on the flight again at 5 o'clock that night. But what was really tricky that week, in the week building up to the, so our board had taken the decision, and then we had a number of days to get all the communication materials right. And we, obviously, president's speech, I remember trying to get the president's speech right. And I remember in the shower 2 days before flying to Rio, coming up with a line, they've chosen medals over morals. And that was the key line that was going to be in the speech. And we built the speech around that. And I worked ridiculously close with our general counsel, Liz Riley, who's probably the greatest sports lawyer on this planet. And obviously, when you're writing a speech of such magnitude, it has to be 100% watertight, because we knew that then there would be a cast case coming out of this immediately. So Liz and I worked on the speech with the evidence that we had, and we finalized the press release. And by Friday night, I was like, everything's done. I can prepare for tomorrow's flight. Then Friday night at 11 o'clock at night, our scientific director rang me and said, Professor McLaren sent through some additional evidence that we've got. We need to change the press release. We need to change the speech. So Saturday morning, I was in the office. There was 3 of us in the office. We worked on everything, because it wasn't just a case of telling the world that we were going to suspend Russia. There was also the stakeholder piece with it. So letters to the National Paralympic Committee informing them of the suspension. Letters to our other national Paralympic committees and international federations telling them that we were taking this decision and these were the reasons why. So the moment we announced it publicly to the media, our members were being informed at the same time. We didn't want them to find out from the media as such. So there was almost like a 5 minutes before the announcement, we informed our membership of what we were doing. And then, yeah, again, a huge story. It was, I think, top news story in the world that day. Our president and I did, again, a ton of interviews. And then, yeah, with that came a bit of a fallout. We obviously were getting, there was a lot of people unhappy in Russia at the decision. We were getting threats. There was a cast case that was involved in, and yeah, it was a very stressful time when you're trying to manage that with the fact that the Paralympic Games themselves are in jeopardy of not even happening. So yeah, it was a a traumatic few weeks, but we succeeded on both counts.
Craig, what's really clear through those brilliant stories is how close and how aligned you are with the CEO in everything that's happening, and that comms is at the core of your organization. That's not something we always experience across every organization.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I think I've never left the IPC. I mean, when I joined the IPC, I intended to be here 2 years, and I've been here 15. The joy of the IPC is that when our board meets, comms is in the room. When the board's going to make a decision, comms' view is we have an opportunity to share our view. My view might not be the winning view, but the fact that when we take decisions, our president is very clear on, right, legal, what's your view on this? Comms, what's your view on this? And then you've got to, then we work together to try and mitigate when the decision's taken. How can we mitigate what could be sometimes an unpopular decision?
Yeah.
And that's one of the joys of the IPC, is that we have a seat at the top table and we can give our view. There's many sports organisations who I've spoken to about whether they potential employment, and that's the first question I ask is am I there to communicate your decisions, or will I be involved in the decision making, be able to present my views? And if it's the former, I'm done.
Yeah.
If it's the latter, then and very rarely is it the latter. So that's why I think the IPC is such a lovely organisation to work for, that comms is at the top table with the governing board, with legal, with all the other representatives, to be able to share our view on the right approach.
Why is that? Do you think that the IPC have picked that route? Do you think, Craig? What makes comms recognised as being as important as, say, legal?
I think it goes back to the fact that in 2010 there were 30 people here.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? I think,
Yeah.
and I think that helped massively in the fact that when I joined the IPC, because of how young the IPC was, I was one of the first recruits they brought in who wasn't an intern.
Right.
And this was about professionalizing the IPC. So I was brought in, most of the people at the IPC at the time had been there at interns or straight from university and gone into the job. And I worked around the agency and in-house, and therefore came with a little bit of credibility. And I managed to, and therefore I was a trusted voice early doors, and therefore was included in the process all along. And that's never changed. And I'm now working with our second president, who's a trained journalist. So that helps tremendously when the guy at the top of the organization completely understands communications. And therefore, the view of comms is always sought out. Again, it doesn't mean just because I get my voice on the table that my view is always right, or we go with what I suggest. But it's really important that you can share your view. And going back to one of your earlier points, Scott, I always think in comms, you've got to work. It's like a game of chess. You've got to think 2 or 3 steps ahead of, if this decision lands, this is what's going to happen in step 2 and step 3. And it's always important that you're not just focused on the short term. You're always looking at the long term and how a decision that you make can impact you in the long run, because you might have a short-term win and everyone's happy with it, but long term it could really destroy what you've spent 30 years trying to set up.
And yeah, I think that the risk is always there that you're trying to win the next day's papers rather than the long term battle, really. Just to think about the role of the IPC itself and the role of communications, and one of the things and I know Chris is a fan of this as well, that I thought was a great example of what sports organisations can do is the We the 15 campaign, because it felt like a real step forward for the Paralympic movement, but also a great example of what sports organisations can do in terms of social impact. And it was comms led, right?
It certainly was, yeah. So when our president was elected in 2017, he came in with a very clear vision of, look, the IPC's focused always on 2 pillars since it was founded in 1989, and that's been membership, strengthening our members around the world, and delivering fantastic Paralympic Games. And they'd reached a level of maturity that he said, now we need to start talking about the impact that we have on society in changing attitudes towards disability and advancing the lives of the world's 1.3 billion persons with disabilities on Earth. So the comms brief changed from strengthening our members and delivering great games to impact. And then we were working on a bit of a campaign in the build up to Tokyo 2020, and then the games were postponed due to the pandemic. And the pandemic disproportionately impacted persons with disabilities around the world. If you looked at the death rate around the world, persons with disabilities were amongst the highest numbers. So we went from a campaign that was just purely on IPC, and we said, look, we actually need just a campaign here that puts disability back front and center. And then we work with Adam and Eve, a London-based ad agency, an amazing agency. And they came to us and said, look, we've got this idea, and it's called We the 15. And it's just a simple message which tells the world that 15% of the world has a disability. And I loved the idea of it. They came up with a symbol, which was like a pie chart of 15%. We came up with an identity of purple, which is the color which many people represent of disability around the world. And we had the nucleus of what was going to be a great campaign. And then we said, look, then the joy of the pandemic was everyone was working from home. And I dare say people were more willing to take your calls during the pandemic than they were at any other time. So to make We the 15 the most successful campaign it could be, I said we need to bring more stakeholders together. If the issue we've got is persons with disabilities are being forgotten about and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. That's not just an IPC problem. That's a problem for every other organization that deals with disability around the world. And no one had ever done a campaign globally before, bringing multiple partners together to deliver on one vision. So I started ringing around all the other organizations who I thought could help us. So I started with the International Disability Alliance, that is effectively the global body representing persons with disabilities, sold the vision to them. They absolutely loved it. Then we delivered a map of who we felt we needed else on the organization. So we looked at the UN agencies. We worked together with Special Olympics, Deaf Olympics, Invictus Games for the first time. And within 6 months, we had 20 international organizations backing the campaign. So it wasn't an IPC campaign. This was a massive global stakeholder campaign. So we had again, getting the stakeholders lined up first was the most important thing. Then once we've got the stakeholders, we were looking at, okay, how do we implement this? So we created a TV advert, which again didn't feature sport. And we wanted the world to realize that persons with disabilities are just like you and I. In fact, I remember having a call with UN Human Rights, and a great guy called Facundo, who's their disability advisor. He was like, Craig, I just want the same shitty life as everybody else. And that resonated with all of us. So the film that we created was 90 seconds long. It featured 60 actors with disabilities. We filmed it in 9 different countries, all during the pandemic, so it's really tricky to do. And it just showed persons with disabilities have the same aspirations as everyone else. They have the same sense of humor as everyone else, but society puts the barriers in the way. And it was just a simple, so that was a very simple execution. So we knew we had the advert. Then we were looking at where we could get the advert out. And obviously we had 200 media rights holders covering the Paralympic Games. So we asked all of them, will you back the campaign? And will you use this advert and give us free airtime? They all said yes. So you had 200 broadcasters around the world giving free airtime. Adam and Eve also secured tons of free billboard space around the world. I mean, we even got Times Square when we launched. We got all our member organizations, our 183 National Paralympic committees behind the campaign. And then we chose a launch date, which was 3 days before the Paralympic Games. And the reason why we strategically chose that date is we knew the world's media would be finished with the Olympics and slowly changing their mindset to the Paralympics. So we knew we had a captive audience. So on the day we launched, we had the TV advert go live with multiple broadcasters around the world showing it. All our national Paralympic committees were briefed with changing landmarks around the world purple in the evening. So we had over 300 landmarks go purple from Auckland to Vegas and many places in between. So basically in every time zone during a 24-hour period, we had at least 10 venues turning purple. It was unbelievable to see. We had a super strong press release. We had video messages from the likes of Prince Harry, Coldplay, all backing it. And then our athletes, obviously, we wanted them to be the mouthpiece for the campaign. And they were all on message about why this campaign was so important, how persons with disabilities have been disproportionately impacted during the pandemic, and how persons with disabilities shouldn't be forgotten about. And you will see how disability can contribute to society through the Paralympic Games, because the Paralympic Games is an example of what persons with disabilities can achieve when the barriers to succeed are removed. And that was 3 days before the games, tons of media coverage. And then in the opening ceremony, we knew we had a captive audience of 300 million people watching around the world. Around the time of our president's speech, he spoke about We the 15. The entire stadium went purple with the We the 15 emblem on the field of play. And then to 300 million people, we played out the We the 15 film. And then we did the same during the closing ceremony. And the media coverage was sensational. It led to many governments realizing they weren't doing enough on disability. It led to tons of legislative changes. And then from the I dare say the ego point of view, it won, I think, over 100 international awards for Campaign of the Year. And for me, what was a lovely moment was getting that recognition. So in 2022 at all the global sport Oscars, we were up against all these big brands who'd done campaigns for the Olympics and the Paralympics, and we went in there with supremely strong CSR campaign, and it won. And that was real good recognition for the work that was a mammoth team effort. I mean, you're probably talking 300 organizations, including our marketing partners, got behind the campaign with the vision of telling the world that 15% of the world had a disability.
Craig, this is going to be a really big question, very few words, I think. Hence the pause. What's different about sport? And from the agency world and the clients you work with and the likes of Yorkshire Water, what did you learn that you've then been able to apply to a different world?
Sport is a unifier and it's got a captive audience. Do you know what I mean? Sport has an ability to bring people together, unite them, and most importantly, from an IPC point of view, change the world. And I think that was so important for us. Is like you go back to Nelson Mandela's speech at the Laureate Awards, and what he says is so true of the IPC. We have in the Paralympic Games the world's third biggest sporting event on this planet. And it's important that we use that platform and that global profile to not just make the IPC a better organization, but use it to advance the lives of 1.3 billion persons with disabilities and create opportunities for them so they can live the same lives as everyone else. And it's really important that that's central to the IPC vision and mission, is using sport as a catalyst to change the world and make things better. Because when you look at inclusion, the world's made so much progress when it comes to gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation, but disability is always forgotten about, despite the fact that it intersects everything. So a campaign like We the 15 was so important on advancing the lives of persons with disabilities, because there's this perception that if you've got a disability, you can't do something. Yet you watch the Paralympic Games and someone runs 100 meters on 10.5 seconds on one leg. Probably 1% of the global population can do that. So the sport changes your attitude towards disability. You realize that persons with disabilities can contribute just like anyone else. Then hopefully that leads to governments, employers doing more for disability. And that's what we've seen with the Paralympic Games. It's what we saw in Paris, where the government invested 1.5 billion euros into disability projects as a result of hosting the games. So it's this magic, and sport does that. There's no other event on earth that can lead to such a transformational impact.
Do you think, Craig, because I think, I mean, the beauty of what you've articulated, and particularly We the 15, was it is absolutely rooted in organisational purpose and the interests of your members and the participants in Paralympic sport. Is that unique to the IPC, or are there transferable lessons that any sports organisation can take on?
think, look, there's some elements that are unique to the IPC. We believe we have the most transformational sport event on earth. And our vision is not just, and our vision is to make for a more inclusive world through parasport. But I think sport properties can realize that you have captive audiences, and therefore you can do more than just put on a great sport event. How can you use your event and the audiences that you draw in and the athletes that you have, and because athletes are role models, do you know what I mean? So how can you use them to advance social change? And I think it's really important that it's not just on the IPC to advance social change. I think every sport body in the world can look at what they have and go, do you know what? How can we? And it's almost like, I sometimes think people are very selfish.
Yeah.
And I think the Paralympic, that campaign on We the 15, we could have quite easily done a brand campaign in the build-up to Tokyo 2020 about how our sport event was going to advance disability change. But the We the 15 campaign didn't even feature sport in the film. We used the platform of the fact that we knew we had 300 million people watching the opening ceremony, and that we had 170 countries competing and 200 media rights holders covering the event. We used those platforms to advance the lives of 1.3 billion persons with disabilities. And there's nothing more rewarding than being involved in delivering a great sport event, but at the same time changing the world and making it better.
I'm with you.
And the things you brought, there's a lot of people we talk to who now aspire to be in sport but work in different worlds. No, the lessons or the things that brought you across.
I think one thing I've always tried to bring in people, and I know our chief executive says the same. We try to bring in people who are better than you. Do you know what I mean? You shouldn't be scared of having bringing in talented people who know their subject area much better than you. And throughout my time at the IPC, I mean, we've gone from having 2.5 people 15 years ago. We've now got nearly a team of 20. And I'm probably on my 3rd or 4th edition of the team. And each time it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And you shouldn't fear bringing in supremely talented people who know better than you. Because where I come in is I can give them the vision, the motivation, and the guidance of where I want them to get to. And they go away and work their magic. And that's something I've been really keen to do since coming here. I think, but then when I look back on my career, it's almost like there's learnings from absolutely everything that every job I've had, whether it was working at Yorkshire Water or working in agency. There's stuff there that I can always pick on. I mean, like when I worked at Yorkshire Water, my boss at the time was a guy called David Simister, the most creative person I will ever work with. And we were working with tap water and sewage. There's probably no more boring product in the world than those two things. But we managed to get global news for how we treated sewage, or we launched diet tap water, for example, on April Fool's Day with GMTV, with a serious message that it was the most cost-effective drink on the planet. And having that freedom and those learning experiences throughout my career were really important. And I always knew when I left university that I wanted to work in sport. That was the goal. But I knew that I maybe wouldn't get there immediately. And then it was almost like, look, it's a 10 to 15 year vision to get into sport, but you need to get the experience and then somehow get into sport somehow and to get there. And I know when I worked in agency in Leeds, I was doing consumer comms, but the agency I worked for also had a sports sponsorship division. And that's how I sort of like got into sport and were able to then obviously land a job at the Rugby Football League.
Which I guess is a whole other chapter, Craig. I feel like we could talk for another couple of hours. I know left throw devices we probably would do. Chris, I'll leave it to you to wrap up the what we've learned from a fantastic 45 minutes with Craig there. Yeah.
I feel like I need an egg timer on this, but
yeah.
Do you know, in simple steps, the first, just so powerful all the way through, so succinct, and there's a soundbite in every paragraph. I think when you said that, sport being a unifier with a captive audience that can change the world, is the sort of phrase that gives you goosebumps, whether you're in the industry or want to get into it. I'm struck personally, actually, about that combination of the human smile, but the really rich, structured, pithy explanation of what you do and why, in a really powerful combination. The kind of handful of thoughts I took from this, in no particular order. Number one is the core position in the organization of comms and the power when it has that core position in comms, in the organization. The second is the level of strategic mapping, planning with purpose, and then simplifying that's required to be that effective. The third is that balance of short and long-term thinking. And it's very easy to be focused on the moment and tomorrow's, as it was, tomorrow's papers or what comes out now, and all around you, but that need for long-term vision for where you're going. Number four was how succinctly you put this, some great examples, We the 15 one there, of the unifying idea that looks so simple, but is so succinct, boiled down, that's the very essence on which you build. And then number five is collaboration, how that is then taken around the whole wheelhouse of people with an interest, whether it's commercial partners, political partners, broadcast partners, and not only the amplification, but the power that each of them brings into the table when you share that unifying idea. So I found this an absolutely fascinating conversation. I'm glad my brain doesn't go ding every time I hear something. It's kind of like an amusement arcade in this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
So just to finish, Craig, I was asked my Kirsty Young question, which is knowing what you know now and thinking about the UCLan graduate that emerged onto the streets of Preston, however many years ago it was. What piece of advice would you give him?
Ooh. Well, for UCLan, it will be taking umbrella because it always rains in Preston. I think, look, I'd like to think that sheer hard work, passion for me is the key thing on everything I do. And I think if you don't have passion for what you do, you will never succeed. So from promoting tap water and sewage at Yorkshire Water to promoting mortgages when I was in agency for Yorkshire Bank, I've always been passionate about what I do. And I think if you can show passion for your job, the rest just is fairly straightforward and easy. And that passion will eventually land you into the job that is perfect for you. And I think for me, the passion now is delivering the world's third biggest sporting event whilst at the same time advancing the lives of 1.3 billion people. And there's no greater passion than being able to change the world through your daily job. And that's what makes the IPC amazing.
Excellent. I think well, I would say 100% your passion came across there, and I was 100% with you. I was ready to jump on the barricades myself, definitely. Listen, thank you, Craig Spence, Chief Brand and Communications Officer for the IPC. It's been a really entertaining and informative and interesting chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Chris.